For many generations, Black women have been strong, powerful, resilient, and hopeful about the future.
I believe that self-care is one of the single most important things that you can do for yourself. I'm teaching my children not only to love themselves and to embrace themselves, but also to take time out to find the things that make them happy, make them love, and to make them feel free every single day.
Today and every day, the Black Women's Health Imperative celebrates our diversity, our beauty, our magic, our confidence, our joy, our love of life, our love for family, and our love for each other. May we all be Black and well for generations to come.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Goler-Blount, President and CEO of the Black Women's Health Imperative, and welcome back to Black and Well TV. We have quite a subject matter to cover today, so we're just going to get right into it. I'm going to start with introducing our incredible panelists, and then we'll get right to questions. I do want to remind you all that you too can ask questions, and so feel free to submit your questions. We'll answer as many as we can during the show and certainly answer those that we don't get to afterwards. So our panelists today are Ryan Wilson, CEO and co-founder of The Gathering Spot. Ryan leads The Gathering Spot, part of TGS Holdings, and it's a consumer lifestyle and hospitality company based in Atlanta, Georgia. The company's holdings consist of The Gathering Spot, a private membership club, A3C, a music, tech, and film conference and festival organization. And Ryan's been recognized as the Small Business Person of the Year by the Atlanta Business Chronicle and named one of the country's most influential African Americans by the Root 100 and Ebony Power 100. And we'll have Dr. Lakeisha Hallman, aka Dr. Key, CEO and founder of the Village Market. And the Village Market is an experiential weekend market that was created to provide national exposure to Black-owned businesses and socially conscious, community-minded entrepreneurs and startups of color. Dr. Hallman has been featured on Because of Them We Can, Madame Noir, the Cool Soror podcast, and Our Voice, Our Lives. And last but not least, we'll have Deana Hamilton, President and CEO of Circle One Associates. It's a management consulting firm specializing in private sector growth strategies for small and medium-sized businesses. Deanna's been honored with a variety of business and community awards, including MBA of the Year Award by the National Black MBA Atlanta chapter, Atlanta Business Journal's Top 25 Influential Women in Atlanta, and the Lincoln Motor Company Rising Star Award. So we will get to it, and we're going to start with Deana Hamilton.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Deana, how are you?
I am great.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So we'll just get right to it. Prior to the pandemic, if you can remember back that far, and protests, we saw corporate America strategically creating more positions to meet the need for diversity. So to begin with, can you kind of give a high level of sort of what diversity and inclusion is, and then talk about whether or not that has paid off, particularly in today's climate?
Well, the intent of diversity and inclusion was to be more inclusive in the corporate environment for minorities employees. And many of the corporations adopted the diversity and inclusion moniker to make sure that they were addressing the needs of their global business from a diverse perspective. And they made a business case around that. And I always used to challenge them that it should be a business imperative and not a business case. We should not have to convince you why diversity and inclusion is important. Diversity and inclusion is important because we're a global business dealing with minorities across the globe. And so it's interesting today to watch and hear diversity and inclusion. And I always tell people, were they strategically creating positions in diversity and inclusion? Or was that an illusion that that was happening?
Okay.
There are some corporations that have done it extremely well. And there are amazing diversity and inclusion leaders across the country. But there are more that are not doing it well than that are doing it well.
So, I am not a diversity and inclusion expert, but I've often heard my colleagues who talk about diversity and inclusion as a business case, that it can actually help generate profits for corporations, fundraise for nonprofits, be strategic partners in organizations. Do you think that's true? I mean, I think you do, but can you talk about how that actually happens?
I do think it's true. It's just not widespread. And so I don't think it should be a business case that has to be proven. Again, I think it should be a business imperative that is necessary in order to move a business initiative forward, have greater market share and greater revenue, because there are Black and brown people across this globe, and they are your consumers. They are people who have viable businesses that you can do business with. I happen to have been one of those and have won awards in that space as a supplier diversity business. But there's still not enough of us. We have to be second tier, not first tier. We are thought about as a case and not an imperative. And there are many businesses in the marketplace that are delivering great value to the market, but don't get an opportunity to have a seat at the table because it's a business case with a small percentage and a small budget. And it's not a business imperative with a larger budget and more of a general market budget that says that you don't have to do business with me because I'm Black, you do business with me because I'm a good business.
Right. So with all that's going on right now, we're seeing really big brands and small brands, but big brands declaring their allegiance to stand with the Black community. And we haven't seen anything quite like this before. What are your thoughts on this? Is it genuine? Do you think it's long lasting? If you were looking at kind of where we are now, talk about that, but I'm going to ask you to prognosticate. Where do you think we'll be at the end of the year?
I do think it's genuine. And here's why I think it's genuine. We're now in a change of what I'm going to call a change of the tide. We are now seeing a baby boomer generation who will exit the marketplace in next year. They are entering a retirement age. And so that baby boomer generation was a part of the civil rights movement. And so they've seen this narrative before. There's new leadership in organizations across the country where your Gen X and your Gen Y are now taking leadership roles, and they see this very differently. So they don't have the century lens of what oppression and racial inequality has looked like back in 1940, 1950, 1960. So they have a different lens with a different point of view. And so I do think it's genuine. I do think that many leaders and organizations will try to truly, truly understand what oppression really looks like and what systematic oppression truly looks like. And they will then begin to implement things within their organization to try to change that narrative.
So that's really interesting to think that they don't sort of have this context of oppression. I'm wondering, is it possible that might not serve them well? I mean, are we at a risk of sort of forgetting where we came from, as we think about progress and making forward and going forward and building our businesses and making our businesses more profitable?
And let me restate that. It's not that they don't have a context of the oppression. They didn't see it firsthand. Okay. They have the story. Like I have the story. My grandmother was born in 1918. So I had the luxury of having the story, but having the experience firsthand, I did not. So my point of view or the fear of it is very different because I haven't had that experience at that level. Mm-hmm. So I do think they have a lens of the oppression, but the viewpoint of it and the ability to change it, the thinking is very different of like, we are courageous enough to buck the system. We are courageous enough to challenge the status quo. You have a generation that was before us that was taught not to do that.
Yeah.
And the fear of not doing that was because they have seen that oppression firsthand and have had those experiences. I think about my ex-boss, who was a sharecropper from Tennessee, and he would tell that story. I may be a CEO now, but I remember picking cotton. Well, I can't tell that story.
Yeah.
So knowing the story is one thing, but being less fearful to challenge the narrative and the story is very different. And I think leaders in corporations today are okay with doing that.
So I would imagine now a lot of managers, leaders are thinking about what their response is. I mean, a lot of folks have posted, statements of support and responses on their social media sites, but they're also thinking about what this means for how their employees work together. So how do we navigate these uncomfortable conversations that are either taking place now or about to take place in corporations across the country?
Courageously. I am a big proponent of courageous conversations. I am
And what does that look like? What's a courageous conversation?
For me, that is addressing the issue head on. Okay. Oftentimes, people believe courageous conversations and being authentic in your thinking and your feelings and being matter of fact is a problem. And it's really not a problem. It is how you contextualize that conversation that really matters. And you can be what I call positively disruptive. It is how you deliver the messaging. But I do think it is the time is now to be authentic in those conversations and to be courageous in them, to be concise and succinct in what you are trying to convey and deliver and what you are asking for.
Okay. And I wonder if some Black employees will feel as though they're being put in a position to sort of, one, explain all of this, but two, perhaps make their white colleagues feel less uncomfortable. What kind of advice would you offer to those who perhaps are put in that situation?
That's interesting to say less uncomfortable. We've been uncomfortable for how long? So I think this is a time to educate. These are teaching moments. I just had a situation like that yesterday in a hotel lobby. These are teaching moments. I think people are really now trying to truly understand what systematic oppression really looks like, what it has been, what have some of the true experiences been, what are some of the unconscious biases that we experience as Black employees in the marketplace. So I think it's really a time to be courageous and educate our counterparts and our peers on what that looks like. And it's okay to call out what their privilege looks like. It's really being okay with having a courageous and authentic conversation. And I am inclined to say that the marketplace and people that don't look like you or I are really open to understanding what that is. Because a lot of people think they know based on the news coverage and the footage that they see. And I tell people all the time, I am not what you see on the news. We're not all the same. We don't all walk alike, talk alike, think alike.
Yeah.
So it is best that you have a conversation with me to understand who I am as an individual and what my experience is, just as I give you that same courtesy. So I think it's really a time for us to be courageous in our communications and educate people on what systematic oppression looks like and unconscious bias looks like and how they can move forward with that by helping me. And I'm willing to help them do that.
Yeah, I suspect there's going to be a lot of help, constructive kinds of conversation, assistance that corporations are going to need, because you're going to have those who are well-meaning but afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing,
right.
And then those who just won't know how to even approach the conversation. One last question before we go to Dr. Key. Are you seeing any examples where corporations really are truly listening and empathizing with their Black employees and not just sort of, voicing support because everybody else is?
I have been sent several letters from CEOs that have issued communications to their entire staff across the entire organization. And I have been pleasantly surprised, but also pleased and proud of the CEOs that were courageous enough to send out these communications that say, we will not tolerate racism in this organization. We will not tolerate unconscious biases in this organization. And we will do whatever we need to do to begin to help our Black employees move past this. And so when the first one I received last Monday, and I was pleasantly surprised, but very proud that these type of communications are going out to employees. And those that are not sending them, shame on them.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, thank you. So please stand by. We're going to bring Dr. Key in. But Deana, thank you very much. We're going to bring you back for some questions. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay. Hey, Dr. Key, how are you?
I'm well.
Good. I ask people how they are. It's like, but I hope you're well. I guess for you to really tell me might take a half an hour, huh?
Well, it's the ebb and flow. In this moment, I'm well.
Okay, good. We'll take that.
In this moment, I'm well.
So would you just sort of start us out with, what is the Village Market and how did this idea occur to you?
Yes, I launched the Village Market in 2016. And if you can imagine a thriving village that it's just the ingredients of excellence and all the magic of Black entrepreneurship and Black creativity that is encapsulated by a community who absolutely love the gifts of Black folk. That is what the Village Market is. And beyond having our quarterly marketplace, we've nurtured a well-vested community for entrepreneurs to have a safe space to receive holistic support that is rooted in mental health, wellness, and we also focus on business development and building a strong culture around what it truly means to be a viable operating business. That was launched in 2016. I got the motivation from my grandmother, who is still an entrepreneur on 45 years in the Mississippi Delta. And I learned community through what I saw as a young child in the Mississippi Delta. An ecosystem before the word ecosystem was used. People relying heavily upon the everyday people in the community to push that community forward. So in a long, short way, that's my amazing village that I'm so fortunate to be a part of.
Okay. And I'm sure they're fortunate to be a part of your village as well. So given where we are with COVID-19 and people not being able to come together physically as a village, how has the pandemic affected your ability to connect them and to kind of keep the village together? Because you have the village has thousands of customers who come in. Right now they can't. So how have you been able to sort of continue those connections?
We have continued the connections. We've just changed how we connect. And so I will say, if you have one of the hardest things in an age of technology is actually to get people physically to convene in person. So in 2016, I did the atypical thing. When everyone was going online, I pulled us offline so we could start seeing each other in person and feeling each other's energy. So you can see the person that you're buying your soap from, seeing the person who's designing your designer bag, and so on and so forth. And so when I realized the pandemic was something that was going to hinder us from gathering, I believe it was March 13th. I didn't hesitate when everyone was canceling events. I made an executive decision. I believe I was one of the first businesses in Atlanta to say, we're not canceling, we're not postponing, we're simply pivoting how we will gather the village. And in less than 2 weeks, we developed a online marketplace for all those entrepreneurs who would have been a part of the physical village market, and created a digital space for them to still have customers. So this is the cool thing. As much as I love having people Physically, I'm a lover of hugs and seeing us in the flesh. What I experienced, what my team and I experienced on March 29th, traditionally in a physical village market, we average about 4,500 people coming to actively buy from Black-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Over that course of the weekend, we saw 70,000 people. And so
Wow.
I strive to always see life for what it is. I couldn't change that the pandemic was here, and nor could my purpose. My job is to convene Black people in a space where anyone can purchase from them. So what was 4,500 people, we had 70,000 shoppers come over the course of the weekend. But I must share that so many Black entrepreneurs deeply rely upon marketplaces, festivals, events like because that is how a lot of their revenue comes in for the year. And most of these businesses, and especially in a startup stage, they need that in person to prove their concept. My goal in making that pivot to that digital space was because I knew when the NBA canceled its season that we were in for something that none of us living has ever experienced. Yeah. And so I wanted to make sure that the businesses were well prepared for what would become a journey of this year and not just a one-time thing.
So given that, right now, a lot of businesses are trying to figure out what's next. There was some assistance from the government. I mean, you had an article where you talked about pursuing the Paycheck Protection Program loans, but how that businesses might be served in other ways, grants from private organizations. Can you talk about what conversations you've had with your businesses, and is there a different way for them to move forward? Because we don't know when this is going to end necessarily.
Yeah, we have no idea. And so what we've done with the PayPal protection plan and our route of going after private grants, I have really pressed upon small businesses in an email that I send to them every week, pressing upon them to look for diverse ways to find funding and also to grow their businesses. And for me, it has been imperative that while the world is somewhat paused due to COVID, that we start to look at those structural things that may hinder us from being funding ready and that may hinder us from having a strong online presence. So we worked diligently with Google, with MailChimp, with UPS to provide very private classes to now over 600 businesses. These are things that we haven't, posted online and stuff like that because we have such an intimate, authentic community. But businesses are being empowered in ways where they're having direct relationships and conversations with UPS. They're having conversations with the big goal of the targets. And so my goal is, while COVID has required us to pause, what are the gifts of the pause? And so I'm hoping in 2021 that businesses can have a strong physical presence and a ginormous online presence. So then the world can begin shopping for them.
So you're taking care of businesses, but you're taking care of the business people as well.
Absolutely. Well, okay. It's taking care of the village.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So one last question, and before we then kind of pivot, and then we'll bring you back. But a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, American Express produced a report, and they talked about how the sector that is starting businesses at the highest rate is actually Black women. So I don't know if you're seeing that, but I'd love to just get your thoughts on Black entrepreneurship, over the next 2 years, since so much is unknown. But I'm going to ask you to predict the future a little bit.
Well, if we look at the data now, if we just look at based on projections of today, due to the ramifications of COVID, a lot of the businesses who I work with presently will be closed by the end of the year. And so there were so many pre-existing ailments within Black businesses. COVID only literally just opened a wound that was already punctured. So our job in this space for anyone in the Black entrepreneurship space is to be able to insulate those businesses again with the resources they need to be equipped for this journey and to make sure that the community is consistently supporting Black-owned businesses.
Okay. Well, Dr. Lakeisha Hallman, thank you, CEO of the Village Market. We'll bring you back. And now we're going to hear from Ryan Wilson, also an entrepreneur. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. So, you've got a different perspective on businesses. What are you hearing right now from business owners? What are they facing? Some of them are closed. Their businesses are boarded up right now. Some have been damaged by the protests. What are you hearing from them?
I mean, we're in the worst economic event of our lifetimes, and true to form throughout most of our history in this country, Black folks are feeling the worst effects or the worst parts of everything that we're seeing. So I'm talking to business owners that had great predictions about what 2020 was going to be that now suddenly are unsure about what the path forward looks like. I'm talking to some others that see a path forward, but are really concerned that if the economy doesn't bounce back, that they also don't know if their businesses will be able to survive in the long term. So there's a lot of fear and anxiety in the small business community, and that's why most of our efforts have been centered around trying to make sure that folks get to the other side of this.
So the jobs report came out today, and there in the initial reports were great. We've added 2 million jobs. We lost 200,000, but we've added 2 million. But in fact, Black unemployment has risen. It hasn't gone down. That didn't get reported, at least initially. So as you said, we're headed to an uncertain future. What are some of the solutions that you and maybe your colleagues are talking about to either stem the tide or help businesses? I mean, where do we go from here?
We've got to get really serious about being intentional in supporting one another. This is not going to happen if we are casual in any way about making sure that the businesses that are in our community, whether they were strong before this or weak before this, that we've got to do everything that we can to try to strengthen all businesses in the community. And place a particular focus there. I think that the work that Dr. Key is doing is an example of the sort of efforts that really lead people to be able to identify how they can become a customer. But in addition to that, we've got to encourage, going to the first part of this conversation, we've got to encourage some of the larger corporations to become a client or a customer themselves of Black-owned business. If they do not, many of the things that we've been experiencing over the past couple of weekends, my fears will continue. The riots have been connected to the social injustices that we've been experiencing, but I believe the economic injustice that also it has been going on for as long as some of the racial injustice that we're highlighting is also a part of the conversation. And if we don't fix it, I don't think our cities will rebound.
So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about how the Gathering Spot started, but what I hear, and this is not my field, but I hear that getting venture capital is always a challenge for Black people, and the numbers are perhaps even in the single digits of Black entrepreneurs who have access to that kind of capital. I'm concerned about what this means now. So what are you thinking in terms of those who are trying to continue their businesses, but people who want to start businesses? One, are there resources out there for capital for people who are starting businesses? And are you concerned about capital being, I won't say drying up, but diverted for people who are in businesses right now?
So there's been some capital available, but not very much, right? Historically, particularly venture capital. That's a very tough category for us as Black people. I mean, most of the stats are less than 1% of venture actually gets to Black founders. So it's almost non-existent. To me, the prioritization needs to be on customers and us being a customer of one another. the banking and venture capital and just general investment space broadly, I don't think are going to catch up to what our need is as a community. But we do have spending power. I think that's something that is talked about a lot, but it's true, right? We have the ability to support our businesses through just old-fashioned, good old being a customer, right? Like that old school thing, and we can't rely upon really any institution or outside funding source at this point. I mean, it's tough on everybody right now, but when it's tough on everybody, that means that it's even worse for us in most instances, and that's the case here.
So I suspect most of the jobs that have come back that are in this latest jobs reports are retail, I would imagine. Do you have any sense of sort of what that distribution of spend is with the Black community? What percentage is spent around Black businesses, not Black businesses? And I mean, are you all thinking about how you might change that?
So I don't have the exact percentage, but what I have seen is that there are some stats that are not playing in our favor. Depending on some reports, 60 or so percent of Black-owned businesses don't have a single employee. I've seen a recent study that says that that's as high as 90% in some communities don't have a single employee. So when you add that to the fact that we are overly concentrated in the most impacted areas or most impacted industries as it relates to COVID, the economic growth that's being talked about today, I don't think in any way, shape, or form represents what's happening here on the ground. It's still very, very difficult. Many businesses have not returned and don't see a path to, right? I mean, it takes capital in many instances to get a business started again. And if there's not a quick return on that capital, then the business won't have very much time. So I don't know the exact statistic, but I'm talking to entrepreneurs each day that are letting me know that we have a really, really short window to try to correct this, or the businesses that we've known and loved for a long time won't exist. If it's happening for the biggest companies in this country, just imagine what's happening to Black folks.
Right. Just one last question before we bring Deana and Dr. Key back. But some businesses in our communities have been damaged because of the riots, and you've talked about that. Is there help for them? I mean, perhaps they have insurance, business interruption insurance and other kinds of, insurance, property damage. But is there help out there for those whose businesses have been damaged and they want to rebuild?
So there are several funds that have been started to try to bring these businesses back. I'll say two things. The first is that there's an old Frederick Douglass quote that the thing worse than rebellion is the thing that causes rebellion. And so while I cannot excuse, and as a person that has a brick and mortar business myself, I don't want this business to be burned down or harmed in any way. But again, we have to understand the economic circumstances that are leading to, in addition to the systemic racism that's being combated, the economic injustice that also exists is going to lead us down a similar path until things are resolved. It is imperative, right, that we shine a spotlight on that issue. If we do not, right, there should be no expectation that folks will continue to stay in their neighborhoods and for lack of a better term, starve. That won't occur, right? So the looting that we saw, to me, what was most sad and I think indicative of where we are is that there were basic necessities that were being stolen, grocery stores and other stores that had basic items. And for those that went to luxury stores, those items were being stolen so that they could be sold, right? So I think we've got to put all of the rioting or looting or whatever you want to call it in context and understand that that is really another manifestation of us not having a strong economic base in our community that has only been exasperated by COVID-19.
Yeah, stealing to feed themselves and take care of their families. Nobody's not to walk down the street and protest in some luxury item necessarily. Yeah.
We've got to highlight that it's not so that everyone can have cool new outfits, right? This is what happens over time. Again, when you're in the worst economic event of our lifetimes, when folks don't have the basic resources that they need, we've got to talk about that openly. It's not a pretty thing to discuss, but it is a real thing that is going on in our communities right now that we have to begin to resolve. So if you know a Black-owned business, if you have a Black-owned business, be a customer or be a client as fast as you can, because it is we won't see these businesses exist even as early as this year if we don't get really, really aggressive about our support.
Okay. Ryan Wilson, CEO and founder of The Gathering Spot, thank you. I want to bring Deana back on and Dr. Key, because we've got some questions for you. And I'll start with the first one for Deana and Ryan. The question is there any real value in becoming a certified minority firm? There's a government designation for that. Or is it just another barrier that corporations have used not to contract with Black-owned companies? So
I would say I am a certified minority business. And prior to me selling that particular company, it was very beneficial. There are people who will say that it's not. I will say that if you understand how to leverage anything to your advantage, it can be. It is a metric for corporations more than it is a barrier. It is really for them to be able to measure around the diversity space, the number of minorities that they have doing business with them. And it is for reporting purposes to the government. So, but it's more about how you build relationships in the marketplace and how you leverage as a business owner. So I would not say that it is a bad thing or a barrier, because it actually did me very well with my business.
Okay. Ryan, any thoughts? Yeah.
I mean, I see no problem with being certified. We're certified as well. And if you're in an industry where there are companies that are specifically looking to have supplier diversity, then you should definitely make sure that your company is under consideration. To me, I think that the issue a lot of times is just the mentality that we have as business owners around the potential to scale, right? So we can exist, yes, as one of the diverse suppliers for a large corporation, but I think that the mentality that we need to adopt is that maybe one day we can become as large as the company that has given us that first contract. That to me is more important. I think sometimes people see themselves as only able to play in a very specific box, and we've got to encourage one another and then put plans behind trying to make sure that our businesses scale to the same size as the same companies that we're seeking contracts from.
And Linda, it's interesting. Ryan is absolutely correct. How Circle One Associates was born. We help small and mid-cap businesses build capacity and scale. Because what I learned when I had Circle One Inc., which was a large format printing company, many companies did not understand the viability of building a business to scale.
Okay. Dr. Key, so this is a question: how can businesses or independent consultants collaborate with each other during these times when there's so much economic stress going on?
Communication. I think the best way to collaborate is to communicate what you need and also what you have to offer. But there's no way at this point, with so much distress going on in our country, that people will simply infer that you are a good partner. And I think we have to take that nuance away. If you have a service and you're willing to collaborate with someone that can help grow and scale your service, and at the same time you can give to them to help them grow, I think that needs to be communicated.
Okay. So Ryan, is the Gathering Spot doing that sort of thing as well? I mean, you have a lot of businesses within your business.
Sure. I mean, we have a lot of initiatives that are going on right now. A fund that's on the front lines of trying to make sure that business owners have access to capital. We're bringing people who have certain resources with those that need it and intimate collaboration. I could go on and on. I mean, we released a healthcare benefit to members of the club yesterday. So to us, in order to be able to survive this time, we've got to think about any and all solutions. And that's been the kind of the main focus the entire time that we've been doing this, but certainly while we've been in immediate crisis.
Okay. Awesome. So Deana, a question around diversity and inclusion, and a couple of things. It's one, there's a question around sort of the tone deaf examples of corporate responses to George Floyd's murder and the protests. These are, statements of, support and solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
But the related question is, should we not think about tying corporate performance, CEO benefits, to performance with diversity and inclusion metrics?
Absolutely. The companies that are doing it right have indeed done that. The board of directors will tie the CEO's compensation model to their diversity goals. The corporations that are not doing it correctly do not. So they absolutely should. It is no ghost in the marketplace that the companies that are getting it right, the CEO's compensation is tied to those diversity goals. Absolutely.
So, Dr. Key, many economists, we've got a question about sort of the economy, have talked about the fundamental change that's occurring because of COVID-19, going to fundamentally change the way we do business. So what do you see? I mean, again, you have a business of businesses as the future of Black businesses, and are you thinking about new, different, innovative ways to do business in the future and to help your existing businesses do business?
Yes, I think we all are thinking about how to do business different today that will make sure that we have a future. What we've been pressed upon is making sure the gifts and talents that Black-owned businesses have, people know about them. And it's to Ryan's point, in order for us to survive, we're going to have to really circulate what we do, who we are, and our ability to help push this economy forward. But yes, the economy will be impacted if we survive this. Is simply because the ecosystem starts to talk about and champion the work of our colleagues.
Okay.
Just briefly, I want to circle back to the diversity and inclusion piece. I want to applaud any corporation that has diversity and inclusion as a part of their core values. I think that that's something that every corporation should have, right? But I think as Black people, we have to realize that these corporations will not be able to out-hire us there is no solution there long term to build economic strength in our community. So applaud the effort and hold those companies accountable, especially if you work at one, right? But to me, it's about fortifying Black-owned businesses in our community that have the potential to scale beyond, frankly, what any of those companies can do. So if you look at the total allocation of jobs that a given company has, even if they hired only Black folks, right, for those jobs, we would still be in crisis. So that isn't, I know it gets brought up a lot in these conversations, and it's important, right? But and a lot of times, and I may be too cynical, I think a lot of that work is more symbolic in nature than it is actually effective. But we as Black people cannot be in any way, shape, or form reliant upon it, right? I mean, we have to grow and scale our own businesses and imagine those companies being as large as some of those that we are seeking employment from. It's possible to do. Many of the companies that we love in that space weren't started that long ago, right? We have businesses in our community that have longer tenure, right? It's just about getting to scale, and that to me is not talked about enough when we're talking about D&I.
And you both raise a very interesting point. One, we can't hire our way out of this situation, but also we're talking about employment and not wealth. Income and not wealth. There's a very big difference between income and wealth. So D&I will get people jobs. I don't know that corporate diversity initiatives build wealth. Not for Black people in this situation.
I would agree. But
other than if you can spin off a company and then grow and scale your company. But I don't know how often that happens. So, yeah, Deanna, go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say I wholeheartedly agree with what Ryan said. And a part of the D&I initiative is also supplier diversity. But it's important for minority businesses to truly understand what capacity building is and how to scale a business and what building viable business means. Product and service that the world needs, not just a subset of people. And the work that Ryan is doing at the Gathering Spot, and also what I hear Dr. Key doing, is phenomenal, because what I try to get entrepreneurs to understand is you can be passionate about something and you're working in that space, but until the world knows it and needs it, and you can build enough capacity to funnel it to the world, then you will stay in a small space. And so capacity building and scalability is key to being able to do business with big businesses to actually impact supplier diversity, become a prime supplier to corporate America, and build wealth within your own family and community.
Okay.
I agree.
And we think about the impacts of COVID now and the businesses that have been able to sustain. It's those businesses that are considered essential businesses.
Right.
And so the questions that I've asked to my community, my village of small businesses, how would you say that your business is essential? Mm-hmm. Beyond being cool, beyond having a great brand and a brand presence, mm-hmm. Are you essential? The reason why the village market is still existing and everyone that's joining in this conversation today is because we are supplying something that is actually needed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you all very much. Deana Hamilton, President and CEO of Circle One Associates, Dr. Lakeisha Hallman, founder and CEO of the Village Market here in Atlanta, and Ryan Wilson, CEO and co-founder of the Gathering Spot here in Atlanta as well. Thank you very much. Please keep the village going, keep the business support going, keep your businesses going. We really appreciate your being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you all for joining us today as we explore the economic impact of COVID-19 and the social injustices that are very much in conversation right now in the media. Join us next week. We will continue this series on the impact on the Black economy in next week's broadcast. So 2 Sundays ago, the conversation that we were having was very much focused on COVID-19 and the disparities in infection and mortality rates and the disproportionate impact on Black people. And we were reeling from business closures because we had to do physical distancing, job loss numbers. There were projections of up to 30% unemployment and a possible 40% poverty rate among Black people by 2022. Then Memorial Day came, and instead of engaging in whatever joyful family gathering could look like during a time of physical distancing, we bore witness to the horrific murder of George Floyd by 4 Minneapolis police officers who swore an oath to protect and serve the citizens of that city, all citizens of that city. Our hearts and prayers go out to Mr. Floyd's wife and daughter, his friends and relatives. I cannot imagine your loss or pain, but I can imagine your anger and your rage, and so could hundreds of thousands of others around the world who took to the streets to say enough, who will continue to say enough. Social media has been flooded with statements of support from corporations, as we talked about. We've seen photos and videos of demonstrations of solidarity, members kneeling at the Capitol, police officers kneeling alongside protesters. Many men and women have shared with me their colleagues and co-workers' expressions of concern and outrage. And it brings to mind 2 conversations I had yesterday. One was from an executive at a Fortune 200 company, a Black man, who received many calls from well-meaning, concerned colleagues after the protests of Mr. Floyd's murder began. One was from a white female coworker who called to talk about her sadness and her anger at Mr. Floyd's murder. And after 10 minutes, she still hadn't asked him how he was doing or how he felt. And the other was from a mother of a son who's an athlete home from college. And she talked to me about how she posted his picture and the address of their home and a picture of their house on their neighborhood app. And on this neighborhood app, she said, my son's name is, and you may see him walking and running around the neighborhood. Please do not call the police on him. He's my son. He lives here in this neighborhood. So there are no platitudes that do enough to talk about how we need to care and support each other. I mean, of course, we need to do better. We can't say enough. There are people and organizations, mine among them, who are working on changing the policies and the institutions that facilitate racism, that make the murder of men like George Floyd and women like Breonna Taylor all too common. The work is really hard, and it will be really uncomfortable. It'll be gut-wrenching for most of us, but it must be done. We just cannot let their deaths or their families' suffering be in vain. We'll see you next week.